Tonight's bold question: who was the aggressor the night George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin? You see, that's going to be a key argument when Zimmerman's murder trial begins in less than a week. And tonight, you're going to see and hear the evidence and decide, was Trayvon Martin the aggressor or was it George Zimmerman? Vinnie Politan's off tonight, so Ashley Merchant is with our in-studio jury here at HLN headquarters in Atlanta. And in Miami tonight, the man who represented O.J. Simpson and Charlie Sheen, Florida criminal defense attorney Gail Galanter. And in New York, former member of the Casey Anthony defense team, Linda Kenny Bodden. Plus, we've got our in-studio experts, criminal investigator Charles Middlestat, Atlanta criminal defense attorney Carrie Hackett, and former death investigator and author of Blood Beneath My Feet, Joseph Scott Morgan. And in Jacksonville, Florida, trial attorney Christopher Chestnut. Now, we begin tonight's bold question: who was the aggressor in the confrontation between George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin? First, let's take a look at the evidence presented by our HLN After Dark regulars, Mike Brooks and Darren Kavanoki.
Let's take a look at some of the evidence in the George Zimmerman case.
There was some gunpowder residue on the clothing, and there was stippling and some apparently burnt material around the entrance wound on the hoodie.
I went to go for my phone, and I reached for my pocket, and I was looking for my phone, and he just punched me in the nose.
Some decent lacerations and abrasions on the back of his head. So was he in fear of his life?
My jacket came up and my shirt came up and exposed my firearm.
And I had my firearm on my right side hip. He saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it.
If this is an inside the pants holster, then how would Trayvon Martin be able to see it?
It's not totally inside the pants, okay?
So some part of it's going to be exposed.
You're going to see this part with the magazine inserted into the bottom of the weapon. You're going to see at least this part, this much of the weapon sticking out, so you can get your hand on it and pull it out very easily.
The only thing in Trayvon Martin's hand was a bag of Skittles.
The Skittles that he bought at the 7-Eleven, apparently bought the lighter at the 7-Eleven also.
What we don't see burglar tools. We don't see anything that suggests that Trayvon's up to no good as he's in this area.
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
And was George really on the way back to his car, or was he pursuing Trayvon? You know, who was the aggressor here? I think that's going to be one of the big questions.
It's one of the biggest questions in this case. Who was the aggressor, George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin? Ashley Merchant is with our in-studio jury.
And you know, Ryan, I think that this is one of the big issues in this case that this jury has to decide, so let's get right to it. Raise your paddles, yes or no. Do you believe that George Zimmerman was the aggressor? All right, well, we've got almost a unanimous yes. Juror number 5, you are on the fence. Can you tell me why?
I am. I just don't believe that, based upon the evidence that we've seen thus far, that there's enough indication one way or another. There's just not enough from what I've seen.
Okay, so you're kind of reserving your opinion.
I'm just very neutral.
Okay, what evidence would persuade you, possibly?
An eyewitness who perhaps witnessed maybe the movements around the complex, or how George was maybe perhaps tailing him, or maybe the other way around.
Okay, and juror number 1, I know you were a little bit on the fence, but you're saying yes now. Why are you saying yes now?
I am, because just seeing what we just saw, hearing the 911 call, the person on the phone says, we don't need you to pursue him, so why would he keep pursuing him? And it just pushes it a little bit over neutral, because he technically did not have to pursue him.
Right, okay, and we've got a couple attorneys on the panel, so let's ask number 9. What do you think? Why are you saying yes?
I agree. When 911 is telling him to not engage, and he continues to engage, that's the very definition of being the aggressor, in my opinion.
Thank you, and I do, Ryan, I think that that's going to be the crux of this case.
I think so, and you know what? The engagement's a big part of this, but I think juror number 5 is the kind of juror the defense definitely wants, the prosecution wants too. Somebody's going to be neutral coming in and hear the evidence as it comes in, just like we'll do tonight. Now, let's talk about the aggressor part of this. I want each one of our panelists to give me one word, okay? One word to describe the confrontation. Charles Middlestat.
Unfortunate.
Unfortunate. Carrie Hackett, one word to describe the confrontation.
Antagonistic.
Joseph Scott Morgan, one word.
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate. Okay, we're going to get to that in a bit. Gail Galanter, one word to describe the confrontation.
Tragic.
Christopher, one word to describe
Predatory.
the confrontation. Predatory. Predatory, he says. All right, Linda Kenny Bodden, one word.
I'm going to go right to it, Ryan. Manslaughter.
Manslaughter. Okay. Ashley Merchant, one word from you.
Avoidable.
Avoidable. Avoidable. A lot of different comments there. And you know what, folks? That's why we're going to go into it tonight. We're going to talk about the evidence that relates to the aggressor part of this case. Perhaps one of the biggest parts of the case that we will see when it starts next week. Keep it right here on After Dark.
How do investigators read forensic evidence? What's it going to take to know exactly what happened the night George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin? Next, a look at how police pieced together the puzzle.
I'm gonna be the kid. What the is your problem? You say what you said. I don't have a problem. Yeah, at that point, nothing else was said. Think. What did you say the first time he hit you? There was no conversation prior. Okay, we're good. Open up your eyes. Nothing at all.
That's George Zimmerman right there talking to police, and it's very important to this case, you think, for both sides to talk about who was the aggressor in the conflict between him and Trayvon Martin. I'm here with veteran defense investigator Charles Middlestat, and let's go through some of the evidence that will come into this trial about that. You know, Charles, let's start first with this police interview. This is George Zimmerman right here talking about the smothering incident that went on. Let's take a look.
Prior to you shooting him, he was on you, correct? Yes. Okay. And you were able to reach into your holster? Yes. Okay. You shot him at point blank range. He was on top of you, right? Yes. Okay. And with all that yelling, nobody came out to help you. And I can't pinpoint where you were smothered. That's the problem that I'm having. And nobody's saying they saw him smothering you. People are saying they saw you on top of you, but they didn't see about the smothering part.
Okay, so that's 3 days after the confrontation. What do you make of that as a defense investigator? Does it tell you anything about who was the aggressor?
Well, you know, what Sereno's looking for is to try to determine the consistency of Zimmerman's statement. At this point, unfortunately, the only statement that we have to go on is Zimmerman's. Unfortunately, Trayvon's not here to give his side of this, of this event. And so what you're looking for is either consistency or inconsistency. So Sereno's, exploring all of this. And what he has at this point is he has Zimmerman's statement and some other lay witness statements. Nobody really had a good perspective on this thing. And so, that's really all you can do at this point is try to see if things are lining up with what his version is.
All right, that's the key, because his version is the only version they have at this point. Now let's take a map of the neighborhood right here. And as we look at this, I want you to tell me what you see in all of this. I'm going to use Zimmerman. Let's take it from the point of where he gets right here. This is inside the complex, right? He says at one point, Trayvon Martin, they both came from this route, and Trayvon Martin's coming this way. At one point, he goes this way, comes back, circles the car, right? And then goes down this area. I'm not the greatest artist, but I'm giving you a rough representation of this. Now, Zimmerman at one point, Charles, says he comes back this way to figure out where he is, what street he's on to tell police, comes back this way, and Trayvon Martin, according to Zimmerman, circles back up. So there's a couple questions here, but I want to get your take. As a defense investigator, what stands out to you here? Because at this point, the confrontation happens. How do you figure out who was the aggressor?
I don't know that we're ever going to determine that. Again, I have to go back to, we rely on Zimmerman's statement unless and until we have a reason not to.
What about Trayvon Martin? The defense is going to say that his house is actually down around this area. Why didn't he just go home?
That's a great question. But we also know from this witness number 8 that he was involved in a conversation and that he knew he was being followed. And maybe, maybe he was trying to impress this young lady. Maybe he didn't want to let her know that he was perhaps concerned that he was being followed. Listen, it's a lot of speculation at this point.
We're going to see a lot of evidence come out of this trial. That's a great point, Charles. All right, let me bring in, Charles, thank you so much. I want to bring in Joseph Scott Morgan, former death investigator, knows all about this case. Joseph, let's talk about the aggressor factor in all this. Take me through the pictures. Tell me what you see. What tells you about who was the aggressor here?
Okay, Ryan. Obviously, the most noticeable thing that we have here is this focal area that's located right in the center. This is indicative of the gunshot wound. This is what we know. This is a primary point of impact of the weapon as it was fired into Trayvon's chest.
Okay, so that's his stomach. Also the hands. You think if there was a dangerous confrontation that there would be scarring on the hands?
Well, there will certainly be abrasions, potentially contusions. Sometimes contusions can hide. The only thing that we know is that right here on the left hand, the medical examiner has identified this as a nonspecific abrasion. He doesn't state in his report as to whether or not this is a resolving injury or if it's fresh.
Okay, and let's take a look at some of this. We've got the scar on the front. That's George Zimmerman on the sides. His hands, and again, you got to meet force with force, but he doesn't have a lot of scars on his hands. What does it tell you?
His hands are completely absent of any kind of visible trauma on his hands. So that leads us to believe, what was he doing with his hands? Where were his hands when this event was going on? And of course, on the back side or the posterior side of Zimmerman's head, we have what are referred to as these focal lacerations. Lacerations come from what we refer to as blunt force trauma. That means that these are not incised wounds, they're not slices. This is consistent with an impact injury.
So does that make you think that Martin was the aggressor at that point?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
We don't know how this happened. The potential could exist that his head could have been slammed into the ground. He could have fallen down. He could have struck something else. We don't know what the origin of these is as of yet.
All right, and this is just the beginning of the evidence that we have, Ashley. You know, there's a lot more that's going to come out during trial. I wonder what your jury thinks.
Well, Ryan, I keep hearing it's possible this happened. It's possible this happened. Ladies and gentlemen, who believes that Trayvon Martin was the aggressor? Wow, pretty split. Let's see. Number 7? Split right down the middle, Ryan.
Split right down the middle. It tells you how close this case might be as soon as it begins, starting next week.
And then he told me the guy was getting close. And he told me the guy was getting real close to him. Next thing I hear, why you following me for?
And what do you hear Trayvon saying?
Why you following me for?
Why are you following me for?
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I hear this man, like old man.
Okay.
Saying, what are you doing around here? And I hear his son like bump. You can hear that Trayvon, somebody bump Trayvon. So I can hear the grass. And then I was still screaming. I was saying Trayvon, Trayvon.
And there was no response?
Yeah. And then next thing the phone is shut off.
Who was the aggressor? Was it Trayvon Martin? Was it George Zimmerman? It's going to be a tough issue in front of the jury in the Zimmerman trial. Zimmerman's got one side of the story, and you heard another side of the story from witness number 8. Let me go out to Yale Galanter. Yale, if it's determined that, let's say, George Zimmerman is the aggressor here, how does it affect his case for self-defense?
He'll be found guilty of manslaughter or some lesser. I don't think he's going to be found guilty of second-degree murder, but, you know, clearly if he was pursuing Trayvon and Trayvon was defending himself, basically George Zimmerman would have just shot him for the sake of shooting him. And if he didn't have, the justification to use deadly force, that's a classic manslaughter or possibly second-degree murder, but probably a manslaughter charge.
Okay, and Christopher Chestnut, you mentioned predatory when I asked the one-word question. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me how that relates and how you see the aggressor situation in this case, based on the evidence we have now.
You know, any fear or imminent danger that Zimmerman felt for his life was invited. He invited himself into this situation. I think he misjudged it, and he ended up overreacting. It's predatory.
All right, Carrie Hackett, you know, the interesting thing here is, let's say they get together. Can the aggressor change in that construct at that point, at the confrontation?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we have to think about Florida law here, which essentially says that even if you are the aggressor and you are in fear of imminent bodily harm or death, then to take these defensive measures and to defend yourself, then that is justified.
But it's got to be force with force, right?
That's right.
Okay, Ashley, you know, it makes this such a tight case, but we're going to hear a lot more evidence at trial. This is just the beginning.
Definitely. It is a tight case, and I think who's the aggressor is what this case is going to come down to. I want to take a couple comments. Juror number 10 is a former 911 operator, and she has listened carefully to this evidence. What do you think about who the aggressor was?
I feel like Zimmerman was the initial aggressor. I feel like Trayvon may have at some point become the aggressor. Like, I don't disagree that he was trying to impress the girlfriend or whatnot because he was a 17-year-old. He's fought before, like we've seen, but I just feel like Zimmerman bit off more than he could chew when he approached him. I mean, if he was really afraid for his life, if a robber was in my neighborhood, I would not approach them.
Well, I will take juror number 10 any day on my jury. Juror number 4, I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
I think it's possible that, you know, if he was going to be the aggressor, it's only because Zimmerman invited the situation, like what was stated earlier by the other attorney, is that, you know, if you're 17, you're on your phone, it is late at night, maybe it's raining, you're having a conversation and this guy comes up on you and he's going to be, hey, why are you in my neighborhood? He may have been trying to, look, I don't want any problems, and then he got too close for comfort, and out of reaction, it's possible that he may have hit him, and Zimmerman may have gotten those injuries on the back of his head. Maybe he fell to the ground, and that's how he did get the trauma on the back of his head. He tripped, he fell backwards, but from what we've seen evidence-wise, there's no scuffle, there's no anything there to show that Trayvon did anything to incite bodily injury to Zimmerman.
My favorite words, maybe.
Maybe. You know what? Defense attorneys live in that space, right?
I live in maybe and
That's
possible.
right. Because maybe for you guys means reasonable doubt.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll have to see how this plays out. All right. Hey, folks, another case we're following out of Kansas. Big case. Brett Seacat accused of killing his wife. He's on trial. His brother took the stand today. He may be taking the stand very, very soon. We'll have that when we come back.
Okay, here's what's not a maybe. Trayvon Martin is dead, killed by the man who started with the gun, had the gun in his pants underneath his belt, seen by Trayvon Martin, and then the gun, who's owned by George Zimmerman, is discharged. That's not a maybe.